Chapter 20. A Great Invalids. 2. Lionel breathed hard. The fog of his breath under the chilly night sky reflected like crystals within the moonlight. Below him, yet another A-grade invalid had fallen, and though Lionel remained uninjured, he could feel himself reaching his limits. It wasn't the first time Lionel had felt like that. During those months in the Mayan temple, he experienced it all the time. It was just that he had underestimated the pressure A-grade invalids could put on him. Though his life was constantly on the line in the temple, it had to be remembered that the Spaniards were barely considered D-grade threats, and that was only when their weapons were factored in. Alone, they were normal mortals, not even of the F-grade. Their only real threat to Lionel were their numbers, especially after his battle experience deepened. Still not good enough. I'm wasting too much energy. One more left. Lionel pedaled hard to the next spot. This invalid had originally been over 400 meters away, but by now it was within 50 of their base. There was no doubt that it had already caught their scent. By the time Lionel made it there, panting, he came face to face with an invalid that seemed painted in silver. Its skin had become a flexible metal, and judging by the heavy sounds its normal footsteps caused, maybe it wasn't just its skin that followed this pattern. Across the board, its stats were completely normal. Nothing was above 0.7. But Lionel knew his senses would not lie to him. This was most definitely an A-grade threat. Now more than ever, Lionel realized just how flawed his self-created stat system was. He still didn't have the ability to account for everything. He couldn't even begin to posit how he would perfectly account for all of these abilities properly. From just about 20 meters away, Lionel launched a dart, immediately catching the attention of the metal invalid. Just as he hoped, it diverted its attention away from his sleeping friends. However, aside from that, the results were less than pleasing. The dart's tip completely shattered against the invalid's body. Its reactions were far too slow to dodge, and its agility was even worse, but it didn't seem to matter. There wasn't even a single scratch on its body. Demi-temps. Lionel quickly loaded another dart, this time aiming for its eye as he continued to pedal. But the dart was shattered once more with a simple blink. Did it blink just on reflex? Or are its eyes truly vulnerable? There wasn't much time left to think. Lionel hopped off his bike once more, charging with his shoulder and ramming into the invalid's chest. A grunt escaped Lionel's lips as the invalid was sent tumbling backward. Only 5'10", lean body type, yet weighs over 400 pounds. Realizing the ramifications of this, Lionel retreated a few steps, nursing the numbness of his shoulder. He had thought that the defensive abilities of his flexible armor would protect him enough to do some damage, but it was very clear that this metal ability of this invalid was several levels more durable. I was wrong. I was using the specifications of a normal human to measure out his stats, but that's foolish. In order for a normal human to exert the kind of force it can while being at less than half the body weight touch. Metal Invalida. Strength, 1.02. Speed, 1.05. Agility, 1. Coordination, 0.5. Stamina, 1.05. Reactions, 0.5. Spirit, 0. Lionel sucked in a cold breath. The adjusted stats were mind-numbing. These were the stats a normal human of about 5'10", 160 pounds would need to move around with the ability of this invalid. If his invalid had more time to adjust to its ability, and reached an equilibrium point, where it was no longer impeded by its heavy body, just what kind of monster would it be? S-grade? SS grade? Something beyond even that? He had simply never seen a stat above 0.99 Tari. How many other invalids were there with this level of potential danger attached to them? The invalid slowly picked itself off of the ground, its white pupils locking onto Lionel with a dull gaze. Before Lionel registered what was happening, a long, sharp blade suddenly appeared between his brows. Lionel's eyes widened. He pulled his head back as fast as he could, withstanding the whiplash with gritted teeth. A fine cut slid across his forehead, the breath of death kissing his cheek. If it wasn't for his obscene reaction time, his skull would have already been split into two. Lionel rolled across the ground, realizing that he had once more miscalculated. Not only was this invalid covered in metal, but it could shape this metal as it pleased. In that moment, even with Lionel completely focused on it, its arm suddenly became a 3-meter-long blade, nearly impaling him. So fasta at least 0.9. I have to adjust his base agility because of that. Damn it! In Lionel's calculations, attack speed was factored into agility. If he corrected the invalid's stats like this, then its adjusted agility for a normal human would be even more ridiculous. Lionel grunted, using his silver rod to block a second blade. But though the metals his rod was formed of managed to withstand the sharp edge, the weight was too much for him to stay on his feet. Lionel coughed violently as his back slammed into a half-collapsed building. He didn't have the luxury of slowly recovering. Without pause, yet another blade tore through the air toward him. There was no time for Lionel to land back on the ground before it reached him. Thinking quickly, he hooked his rod into a broken window. He turned it hard, launching himself toward his left. The blade tore through the building's wall as though it was a piece of paper. It continued to follow through, chasing after Lionel while slicing through tough sheets of metal and stone with absolute ease. Lionel fell through the air quickly, morphing his silver rod back into a bike and pedaling away. His blade gets thinner the further from his body it is. He isn't producing more metal, he's just diluting what he has to extend his range. So, Lionel's gaze flashed, his thoughts spinning. His bike sped up. There it is. 10 meters is his limit. Lionel's bike cut a hard turn, driving up the side of a tilted building and back toward the Thea. The invalid, with everything his thighs could muster, and flipped back. Lionel soared through the air. There was no longer any room to maneuver. He fell in an arc aimed right for the invalid. The invalid's gaze showed no emotion. It simply brandished its second arm, sending out a blade that was impossible for Lionel to dodge. Lionel twisted his body, a sharp spike of pain ripping through his left shoulder as the blade went through him and his flexible armor with ease. However, his gaze remained pure and focused. His bike turned back into a rod he gripped tightly. Using it like a spear with his only good remaining arm, he stabbed it toward the invalid's eye. The pain was absolutely excruciating. As his body fell under gravity's influence, the blade tore further and further into his shoulder. There were several times in those split seconds that Lionel thought he would pass out. A sharp clink sounded as the invalid closed its eyes. However, Lionel had already expected this. He wouldn't lay his life on the line for such a poor attempt at victory. Both of his feet landed on the free shoulder of the invalid, the very one he had stretched the arm of to a 10-meter length. In his hurry to attack Lionel, who was streaking through the air, he had yet to retract it, just as expected. The invalid's coordination was too low to complete too many fine motor tasks at once. Lionel roared, both of his legs slamming downward with all of his might. The invalid fell over. Then, with a sharp snap, its arm broke right at its shoulder joint. Lionel finally hit the ground, his own shoulder becoming a bloody mess as he rolled away, just managing to pull the invalid's blade out. Slowly pushing himself up, Lionel's eyes remained focused. He had used advantage of the invalid stretching itself too thin to break off one of its arms. But in the process, he did functionally lost an arm as well. The break in Lionel's flexible armor began to mend itself, sewing his wound shut at the same time. This was why he dared to take on such a terrible injury. Even if his left arm was now all but useless, blood loss wouldn't be a problem. In fact, due to the amount of pressure his armor was placing on his wound to keep it suppressed, in a pinch, it wouldn't be impossible to withstand some pain and use it. He's bleeding. Lionel's pupils constricted. He could see it. From the split in the invalid's shoulder, a coarse, metal-infused liquid was dripping. Lionel could even faintly see some pink muscle fibers. So his inner organs aren't metal. If that's the case, there are some other methods I can use. His coordination status too poor to extend blades from anywhere other than his arms. Now that I only have to worry about just one. Lionel sprinted forward. As he did, he dropped one of his silver rods 3 sections away, leaving it at a manageable length for his one arm. It took some teeth grinding to use his left arm to pin it in place while he did this, but he managed to push through. The invalid struggled to stand, but despite losing an arm, it was still too heavy. In addition, with its poor coordination and relative strength, maneuvering with just a single arm was too difficult. To make matters worse, its only remaining arm was still in the form of the blade that pierced Lionel's shoulder. It had only barely managed to get to its knees when Lionel appeared before it, swinging down with all his might right onto its skull. The loud clang of metal bashing against metal sounded under the otherwise quiet night sky. Lionel's actions seemed foolish. It was impossible for his blunt weapon to kill the invalid in this way, and with its metal skin, he couldn't injure it either. However, something shocking happened in the next moment. The invalid stumbled. From its position on its knees, it wobbled as though dizzy. By the time it reoriented itself, another strike had come downward, bashing its head again. This time, unable to brace itself, its head rebounded against the concrete. It was exactly as Lionel expected. If this invalid could bleed, if it had normal muscle fibers, its internal organs were likely normal. In such a case, what would happen to a soft brain rattling inside a metal box that was being hit so hard? Not only did the invalid's metal body start ringing, but so did the rod in Lionel's hand. Lionel smartly didn't focus on striking down with as much force as possible anymore. Instead, he focused on finding the resonance frequency of the metal, making it store more and more energy. Lionel's senses locked onto the perfect striking strength. With his unmatched coordination, he swung his arm in perfect rhythm, neither using too much or too little power. By Lionel's 10th strike, his breathing was like hot coal to his body. The invalid lay twitching on the ground, but Lionel madly continued. It was too strong. If he let up and let it recover, it would be him who died here. Unwittingly, in his fatigue, his mind settled into a primal, near-bestial state, his hidden, imposing aura blooming forth and blanketing the area more and more with every swing. Lionel didn't even notice that blood began to ooze along with an unknown white substance from the invalid's ears. The only so-called twitching was of its fingers just barely scraping against the ground, the last movements of the dead. It wasn't until Lionel's rod slipped through the motes of lights it became and hit the concrete, almost shattering his wrist, did he awake from his stupor. Lionel Morales. Strength, 0.75. Speed, 0.7. 0.1. Agility, 0.8. 0.9. Stamina, 0.8105. Reactions, 0.99. Spirit, 0.99. Spirit, 0.1. The improvement was shocking. Maybe even more shocking was the fact that over 90% of it had come from this lone A-grade invalid. The other 6 had hardly caused a shift. Lionel realized that his rating system was too flawed. If he couldn't accurately predict things in this way, it had little value. But in truth, this wasn't what was on Lionel's mind at this moment. He had killed again. But this killer, it was very different from the others. He had done it subconsciously, as though there was a beast lying in his mind, as though his morality was just fake posturing he used to absolve himself of responsibility. Look at that. He really killed it. Damn, I knew I should have bet. Too late. Who asked you to reject free money? You dodged a bullet and now you want to gloat. Weren't you the one just saying the kid was definitely dead? Shut up, the two of you. Lionel frowned. He hadn't picked up these people before. They had definitely been waiting outside the 50-meter radius of him. In meditation, Lionel's senses were near perfect within 50 meters. In a state of wakefulness like he was now, 20 meters was his best. But he still had vague inklings of the goings-on up to 50 meters away. In addition, he could gain a very rough picture of a few hundred meters if the targets had large enough energy signatures, like the A-grade invalids, for example. With how he had sharpened his battle experience in the Mayan temple, he would never lower his guard so easily. He had been constantly scanning the area in case other invalids came to interrupt his fight, but he had never thought the ones to come would be other humans. Hey, kid, we can make this easy on you. After all, we're fellow humans. You seem to have gotten some good stuff out of your zone. That rod looks particularly useful. How about you share some with us, and we'll let you go unharmed? Lionel's face remained expressionless. His rod? This was about the only thing on his body that wasn't a reward from the zone he entered. It seemed not everyone was able to see through treasure grades as easily as he could, but that inadvertently gave Lionel another thought. These treasures in his hand were gifted by higher-level worlds. Obviously, they didn't come from silver zones that one could take treasures out of, or else they'd be higher grade. Didn't that mean these weapons were created? In that case, could Earth do the same? I'll just shatter their kneecaps with my darts and leave them to karma. Lionel went to reach for his dart and froze, a sharp pain flying through his body. He hadn't broken his wrist. But his right shoulder was dislocated. Even as Lionel was thinking of running, a figure came crashing from tens of meters above him, landing to his side with a boom. Chapter 21, Tier 7, Black Zone. Aina. Lionel suddenly remembered that before he sensed that 7A grade invalids, he had also caught the faint fluctuation of someone or something else. But he had lost track of it near immediately. Could that have been Aina? But if it was, should he feel bitter about the fact she hadn't raised a hand to help him to now? These thoughts didn't survive very long because though Aina tried to hide it, his senses were much too sharp. He saw that not only was she not in top form currently, but there were small specks of dirt, blood, and grime in hard-to-find areas. There was no way Aina had rolled out of bed like that. Aina turned back and looked up at Lionel. "Why did you leave without a word? I already said that it's not safe to work alone." Hearing these words, Lionel instinctually frowned. "Are you sure it was you who said that? Or was it your servant Yuri?" Lionel was shocked by the own snappiness in his voice, but the mixture of resentment and fatigue left him unable to control his emotions very well. It really had been Yuri who said that her Miss Aina wanted to work together. Those words had never come out of Aina's own mouth. Why should he care about something she couldn't even be bothered to say personally? He was more surprised she hadn't sent her little servant here instead. "Both," Aina replied with a glare. "You're our leader. You can't recklessly leave on your own. Even if you did it to protect us, don't you think your own safety is important too? If you fall, do you think they would be able to survive for long?" These were the most words Lionel had ever heard Aina speak. However, even if he was stunned, he had far more pent-up rage that suppressed it completely. Just as he wanted to respond, a snicker came from a few meters away. "It's fine if you two want to have a lover's quarrel, but do so after you meet my demands. That axe on your back looks pretty good, girl. You can hand it over too." Aina's head snapped back to the three men. "Shut the hell up while I'm talking, or you'll find yourselves split in half before you can regret it." Lionel's gaze trembled at those words. He didn't even have time to register the shock he should have felt about them coming from Aina's mouth. Was this the same shy girl who ran away every time he confessed? The same quiet girl who spoke so few words before? How can you keep treating human lives so casually? Aina's head snapped back toward Lionel. "Can't you tell that they want to kill you? Do you really believe that they'll just back away after all of this? They saw you kill an A-grade invalid on your own. You think they want that kind of enemy getting away from them? Why are you so naive?" Lionel's eyes bulged, reddening in a torrent of uncontrollable anger. "Did you see that?" One of the leading man's partners pointed. "That's gotta be one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. She's probably one of those noble girls from a big family, Ach. I really want to taste one." It seemed that since Aina immediately faced Lionel when she fell by his side, and the fact her massive axe covered her back view, it wasn't until she turned to curse at them that they got a true look at her. "She really does look good. You got first dibs last time, though. It's my turn." "No way. She smells like a virgin. I can catch the whiff from here. She's much higher quality than the last one." The leader cut in, licking his lips. "Let's use the usual method to decide." "Fine. Rock, paper, scissors it is. Ready on dotting." The night sky fell into a greater darkness. For a moment, it felt that even the moon above was eclipsed, the bloody, murderous intent suffocating even its beauty. The three men turned toward Lionel, terrified expressions on their faces. "I dare you to say another word about her." Lionel's eyes, already fueled by his other burning emotions, had almost completely turned a blood red. His whites were swarmed by snaking blood vessels, and his irises, once a gentle hazel, blackened completely. They simply didn't deserve to live. Lionel's muscles flexed so strongly that his dislocated shoulders snapped back into place. Ignoring the twanging pain, he reached to his back and pulled out 3 darts. What happened next could only be considered a blur. 3 flying silver spears. 3 cries for help. 3 bloody holes. 3 dead corpses. Even after the deed was done, Lionel was still livid. Aina sent a glance toward him, her emotions once more unreadable. She walked forward and took the treasures they had kept on their bodies and walked back while Lionel was still in a blinded rage. Oofa! A tiny fist smashed against Lionel's chest, causing him to stumble backward and fall to the ground in his fatigue. If it wasn't for his flexible armor, his ribs would have probably broken. Lionel looked up to find Aina. He obviously knew that she was the one responsible, but he was too tired to do much about it. He simply met her gaze, huffing and puffing. These are only D-grade, but they're still better than using your bike as a weapon like that. A pile of treasures fell from her small arms. There were 3 weapons, a shield, and 3 armors for various body parts. Of the armors, 1 was for the shins, another was a helmet, and the last was a chest protector. As for the weapons, there was a pike, a sword, and finally a spear. Lionel didn't answer, getting the first good look at Aina he had in almost a year. Even when he came back from the Mayan temple, he hadn't had a chance before her arm was suddenly through Conrad's chest. Looking at her now, he still couldn't fuse her image with the devil of her that had been growing in his mind. Her features were too delicate, too beautiful, for her to be that same woman who all but ripped a man's heart out with her bare hands. Her body was fitted in a deep black militaristic outfit. There were many pockets and belts that surrounded her figure, still doing just as bad a job at hiding her curves as her dresses had. Her long black hair flowed loosely in the wind, disappearing into its folds from time to time. Somehow, her amber eyes seemed closer to gold than they had been before. Whether that was his imagination or the objective reality, Lionel wasn't sure. Lionel smiled bitterly, realizing why he had avoided observing her closely over the past few days. His heart it still beat wildly. Leave the rest of the things for the others. I'll take the spear and shield us. Also, thank you. I didn't consider enough that if there were a grade invalids around drawn in by the zone opening, there would definitely be other invalids as well. Aina's expression softened at these words, but she didn't say anything in response. Let's head back. Lionel slowly picked himself off of the ground. We can't, Aina suddenly said. As you said, the zone is pulling in invalids. Until it's closed, getting out of this area will be difficult. Invalids have far sharper senses than we do in exchange for their weaker intelligence. They can sense a zone from tens of miles away and will slowly converge. Lionel frowned. He most definitely wasn't in a state to be entering a zone right now. Here, one may while. Aina handed him something that looked like a pill. She had pulled it out from one of the many pockets she had. Lionel raised an eyebrow. He hadn't been able to sense something with such dense energy, despite Aina standing right in front of him. It seemed her pockets weren't normal. There wasn't any skepticism in Lionel's thoughts. He took the pill from her, careful not to touch her soft palm, and swallowed it. A fire lit down his throat, coursing through his body as through it was a racetrack. The wound on his left shoulder rapidly sealed, and even the soreness in his right vanished. Finally, his fatigue trickled away as though he had just taken a good nap. Lionel Morales. Strength, 0.8. Speed, 0.75. 0.1. Agility, 0.85. 0.99. Stamina, 0.99. Stamina, 0.8. 6. 0.99. Spirit, 0.9. Spirit. A flash of energy raged around Lionel's body. A barrier that had blocked him crumbled, and he felt his spirit shoot upward. A spirit, 0.111. It was a small change, but Lionel felt that it made a world of difference. Just what kind of pill was that? Almost all his stats had ticked up by 0.05. Lionel wasn't a fool. He knew this pill was more valuable than Aina let on. Even putting his life on the line against the metal invalid wasn't as good. Take care of yourself from now on, Aina said. This pill only works once. Thanks, Lionel said absent-mindedly. We can go now. Yuri will find this place after we've gone. Shouldn't we wait for them then? It's not far. We're already less than 50 meters from them. After he said this, Lionel mumbled under his breath. I've already made the mistake of entering a zone without enough numbers before. Aina's senses were sharper than he gave them credit for. Her brows raised in shock at these words unbeknownst to him. No, the zone is an S-grade zone with a 2-person limit. I have a detection device that has 95% accuracy on zones below the SS grade. All right then. Lionel didn't question it. Aina and him were without a doubt the 2 most powerful of their group. It only made sense for them to enter. It didn't take long for the 2 to cross the 500-meter distance to the zone, having not spoken a single word to the other. The density of invalids had been growing, but with Lionel's senses, if they wanted to avoid them, it wasn't a problem. The target of the invalids was never the zone itself, but rather the humans it would attract. And, with their lack of intelligence, they didn't know to wait directly outside of the whirling blue portal. Unlike the portal that dragged them in so many months prior, this portal didn't have a suction effect. It sat hovering in the air silently, not disturbing the area at all. If he wasn't certain before, Lionel was now that there was something fundamentally different about the first zone they were sent into. Maybe if he entered this time, the subtle upticks in his stats would continue instead of pausing like it had last time. After taking Ina's pill, Lionel realized something. That burning feeling, it was exactly like the green vomit his dad made him drink every day for 17 years. What if the slow increases in his stats wasn't because of the normal evolution of his body as Earth tended toward the fourth dimension, but was rather thanks to his father? Lionel and Ina simultaneously leaped from a perch high up, falling into the zone that swirled shut behind them. In their absence, the invalids lost track of the scent that had converged them, and they began to slowly disperse. A subdimensional zone detected. Merlin's Prophecy, Joan of Arc, Jeanne d'Arc. A subdimensional zone grade. A.E. Clear requirements. A Joan of Arc in repelling the English army. Side quest. Unable to detect. Scope of system too limited. Reward. Unable to detect. Scope of system too limited. It is recommended that subject, Lionel Morales, complete this quest with a minimum of 7 other individuals. Subject's degraded ability is too low. 8-person limit. Lionel shook his head. The voice of Lionel's wristwatch sounded in his mind, but he ignored it in the end. Compared to Ina's detection treasure, it was too inferior. There was no need to take any of it seriously. It couldn't even get the S-grade correct. Last time it had predicted the Mayan temple was an F-grade zone until he ran into the priest, and it upped it to the C-grade. Plus, he didn't really have the luxury to think about it even if he wanted to. He and Ina appeared in a small village filled with dusted roads. But, considering the burning cottages and huts around them, not to mention the sound of screaming and clanking swords, it was under attack. There was only one thing Lionel did trust his wristwatch about. This was likely France, and their quest most definitely had something to do with that legendary woman.